What we're really seeing, particularly with the appointment of the new defense minister, Andrei Belousov, who is an economist, an economic manager more than anything else, is that sense that they're really digging in for the long term. And in particular, they're shifting the economy to increasingly being just simply directed towards keeping the war effort going. So very much, I would say that this doesn't necessarily leave Putin stronger or weaker, but shows a reluctant admission that there's not going to be an end to this war at all soon.
Well, in his big speech this morning, the Prime Minister included Russia in what he called the axis of authoritarianism. But is Russian President Vladimir Putin in a stronger or weaker position today after removing his long-standing defence minister, Sergei Shoigu? Well, Professor Mark Galeotti is an expert on Russia and director of the consultancy Mayak Intelligence and joins me now. Hi, Mark.
Hello there.
For people who don't know, just tell us about who Sergei Shoigu is and why his removal is significant.
Well, look, he's a long-standing defence minister who, in civil years, actually seemed to be doing a decent job, but he's proven to be a pretty catastrophically bad defence minister in wartime. He's now massively unpopular with his troops. And so there had been quite a bit of thought that he would actually go at some point. And given that last month, one of his deputy ministers, who's also one of his own cronies, was arrested on corruption charges, definitely his time seemed to be running out. But he is also a personal friend of Putin's. They go hiking in Siberia together, and Shoigu skates on Putin's own ice hockey team. And therefore, it's not surprising that instead of actually being dismissed entirely, he's been moved sideways to a new job.
And so what does that tell us about how Putin thinks the war is going? Because it comes at a time when we're seeing what appears to be a new push into Ukraine.
Yeah, I think from their point of view, look, in the short term, they're actually quite happy with how things are going. And there's this new thrust we're seeing in the north against the city of Kharkiv, which is probably really more of a feint and a diversion than anything else, shows that at the moment they're happy to take advantage of the fact that they have more troops and more ammunition at present. However, there's no real sense, I think, on their part that this war is going to end at all soon. And what we're really seeing, particularly with the appointment of the new defense minister, Andrei Belousov, who is an economist, an economic manager more than anything else, is that sense that they're really digging in for the long term. And in particular, they're shifting the economy to increasingly being just simply directed towards keeping the war effort going. So very much, I would say that this doesn't necessarily leave Putin stronger or weaker, but shows a reluctant admission that there's not going to be an end to this war at all soon.
And then what can Ukraine? Is there anything that Ukraine can do about this conflict to change up what they're doing?
I think really a lot is going to depend actually on next year. And it's terrible to be thinking about the fact that the fighting and the blood is going to continue until that point. But really, the current plan seems to be that this year, especially given just how late American assistance has been coming, really they just dug in and just trying to minimize Russian losses while building up their forces for a major counteroffensive next year. They've just passed a new law on mobilization, which will allow them to call up more men to fight, and more assistance is coming. Not just the Americans, but there's a Czech-led initiative to bring ammunition to them, which will then be kicking in next month and so forth. So the idea is that next year they can launch a counteroffensive in the hope of pushing the Russians back, maybe even pushing them out, and then perhaps on the basis of a position of strength, be able to open talks with Russia. But so much will depend between what happens now and then, and so much will depend on whether this counteroffensive next year can be more successful than last year's.
Ukraine's top military commander has admitted that the situation in the northeastern Kharkiv region has become difficult. Russia claims to have captured several more villages, taking advantage of Ukraine's shortage of both manpower and weapons. Maria Avdiva is a security expert in Kharkiv and joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. Can you just give us an update of the latest on the ground there, given those claims overnight?
Yeah, during the night, several more villages were captured by Russian troops. This is the villages to the north of Kharkiv and around Vovchansk. which is a city that lies on the river, just on the border with Russia to the east north of the city of Kharkiv. So this means that Russian troops are still advancing despite Ukrainian attempt to defend and to protect the further villages and towns on their way. But there is a hope, and I think there are signs that this advance will be stopped because Ukraine is redeploying more troops and Ukraine has more defense lines ahead. Basically, what happened, Russia managed to go along the first defense line, but there's also the second and the third one. The only problem is that those defense lines, especially, for example, the third one, they are too close to the city itself. So in the bad case, if Russian troops succeed in getting closer to the city, this will put Kharkiv, the second Ukrainian largest city, in the danger of the artillery fire shelling, which we have seen in the first days and months of invasion.
And clearly a really precarious situation there for people living in that area. What happened with the first line of defense? You mentioned that Russian troops have made it through that first line of defense. There is a second and a third line. Was it under preparedness? Was it underpowered? How did the Russians make it through?
Well, there are different kinds of reports. One is that there is a possibility that the lines of defense were not built too close to the border because that was not possible physically, because this area is constantly under the Russian shelling and it can be seen through. So this was the reason to build them somewhat further. And then what makes it most important and most difficult in the situation is all those people who live in the area, because now they have to evacuate urgently, immediately. Actually, the evacuation is already happening for some time, for 2 days now. They are evacuated to Kharkiv because the situation in the city is more or less calm. And this is their second time. They have already been through all the horrors of occupation and they know what Russian occupation brings. So this is why they are fleeing now, not to go through it again. But this is the situation is worrying. You are completely right.
And how much are the questions being asked about Western funding and whether or not, any extra weaponry could have made a difference here?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues. And I think that Russians are taking advantage in terms of the timing, because they know that all that Western weapons were not, it wasn't here in time, and it's still not here. So the package was just announced and there was not enough time for all these weapons to come to the front lines. And this is why Russia is attacking at this moment, because they know that Ukrainian army does not have enough, and this is a time. So they take advantage on that. If Ukraine had the weapons in time, I doubt that Russia will try to attack in this direction.
We've also seen overnight reports that Sergei Shoigu has been replaced. What does that mean for this conflict?
Well, if we look at the shifts in the higher Russian leadership, this probably means that Russia will bring and flow even more money into the war. So meaning that all the Russian economy will work for war effort. And this means that Putin and Russia are preparing for a long war. And this is why this Ukrainian claim that this is not only about Ukraine has more grounds, because we clearly see that they don't do it just for Ukraine. They are preparing for a larger, bigger war. And this means that they will go further if Russia succeeds in Ukraine.
Maria Avdieva, thank you for joining us. Maria Avdieva, there, a security expert in Kharkiv.